Hi everybody. Today we're going to discuss about the other JDBC concepts that we have left yesterday. So I've installed Oracle in my local machine. So we'll look at how you can connect to the Oracle today, and then we'll see what are the basic concepts that are involved in connecting to the database. Okay. So let me open the document, and then we'll see what are the steps involved, so that we can discuss in the Java file in a Java class what is required. Okay. So we have discussed about the basic of JDBC, and then we have discussed about how many drivers are there and what is the best one that you can use. And in today's class we are going to use the JDBC driver 4, because all the other three are not actually very relevant to my use, because one is commercial, we can't use commercial, and other one is used only for desktop applications, and other one is to use it for small applications. Okay, and a type 4 driver is pretty portable when compared to the other three drivers, and it is called as pure Java driver, and it is very easy and very commonly used. I can say 95% this is being used, since it's free of cost. I mean, it depends on the company. Again, if they want to buy something, they can use DB2 or some other MS Access database, depending on the usage. But most of the people are considered 95%. I'm sorry, but most of the developers tend to use type 4 driver to connect to the database. Okay, so now yesterday we have discussed what is happening when you use driver, how the conversion is happening, and the query parsing when it is done, and how many steps are involved in it, and other stuff. So today, first thing that we are going to discuss is the steps to design JDBC applications. Okay, so there are a couple of steps that you need to follow in order to connect to a JDBC using JDBC API, and they're very very common. I mean, I can say these are mandatory steps, not very common. These are mandatory steps that you need to follow in order to connect to the database using Java and JDBC API. Okay, so prior to this, what you have to get installed in your machine is, one is Oracle or any DB software that you can get hold of, and the second one is the driver jar file, depending on the third-party API that you want to connect. Since I'm using let me open Eclipse in the meantime. Okay, since I'm using Oracle, I'm using OJDBC 6.jar file, which I have downloaded so that all the helper classes will be there in the jar file. Jar file is nothing but a zip file which is having all the dot class files, which I have to use it in my application. Okay, every jar file is same. It will have all the dot class files, and whenever you want to use the any class from that particular jar, you have to include that in your build path if you are working in Eclipse. Okay, so that is one way. Is starting, and the next one is you have to get some software that needed to be installed for starting the database. Otherwise, you can't execute the examples or test your code locally. Okay, and so those are the main things. The respective jar file, depending on the browser that you have downloaded. I mean, depending on the DB database software that you have downloaded and installed in your machine, and the corresponding jar file. You can easily get them. For example, if you're using Oracle, so you don't know what jar file you want, you can just Google them, what is jar file dependent on it, and then you can, depending on the version, you can download the jar file. Or if you are using Maven is it's a build tool. It will get you all the dependent jar files without you thinking about the version dependency and all such stuff. We'll discuss about Maven in the end, but since I know what I'm using, I've downloaded JDBC 6.jar, and then we will look at what are the steps involved in connecting to a database. Okay, so the first one is the first step that is involved in connecting to a JDBC application is, guys, and we are using you have to keep in mind, we are using Java applications, since it's a Java technology, the JDBC Java API. We use Java applications main method, and we use JDBC API to connect to the database that is there installed in your machine, or to any remote server that you can access from your local machine. Okay, so we are using Java class and a main method, and main method will get connected to the database and do the operations. Okay, so that is just like a introduction. So in whatever examples that we are going to see are in that case. And coming to the steps that are involved in that, there are actually 5 steps. And 5 steps are very important when you are doing the coding or connecting using the JDBC API in Java applications. Okay, it could be anything. It could be a main method, it could be a web application, any application that you take. So the first step is, whenever you can identify the driver that you are using, you have to load and register the driver. Loading and registering the driver is nothing but, when you download a jar file, depending on your DB software that you have installed, that jar file should be made available in the class path. Otherwise, your application will not be able to identify the .class files where they are available. It is not just the step that is involved to import the jar file or put the jar file keep the jar file in the build path. You have to load the classes and register the driver. The driver is nothing but the intermediate class which is used to communicate between 1 second. Sorry. Yeah. So all that you have to do is you have to identify the identification in the means you don't need to go and look at the class file that you want to load. There is one class file for each and every database that you are using. For Oracle, you have a prescribed, say it could be JDBC class file. For DB2, it could be a DB2 class file. With corresponding to the database, you can get you can get it from Google. I mean, there's no logic also involved in it. You can get it, but you have to identify it and load it, and you have to register the driver. That means it says that you have the .class file that is available, and then you can pick the .class file bytecode and place it in the Java heap memory so that it will be available when you are requesting for it. Okay, so that is first step. And the second step is you have to connect to the database through the Java application with the help of the details of the database. For example, the details of the database could be a URL to identify the database, okay, a username where you connect to the database, and a password for that username. So these are the three mandatory I can say values that you have to give in order to connect to a database from Java application. I mean, to any application, these are the three mandatory fields. I mean, we already know that, right? So that is the second step. And the third step is you have to create either statement object or prepared statement object depending on the application request. So I mean, a small liner for the differences between statement and prepared statement is used to execute a piece of or SQL statement only once, whereas coming to prepared statement, if you want to execute a single SQL statement for like 100 or 200 times, in order to improve the performance, you have to use the prepared statement. So that is all I can tell you now. We'll discuss more about those two things later, but the steps are more important here. Okay, you either create a statement object or a prepared statement object, and then on that statement object you have to write SQL query and then execute it. It is the fourth step. And the fifth step is close the connection object. So this is very important step, and people tend to forget it. The problem with this is, if you don't close the connection object will only be destroyed when the garbage collector comes into picture. Otherwise, the connection object will always be occupied even after your job is done. Okay, so that is the reason you have to close the connection object whenever you open it, and that is a mandatory step involved in it. You can't just ignore it since it is just closing. Okay, and so these are the 5 steps involved. So we'll go one by one and then discuss what you can do in with respect to that in the coding part. Okay. So the first step, load and register the driver. What is meant by loading and registering the driver? Loading is you have to identify the class bytecode where it is available and load it into the Java heap memory and register the driver. Registering is nothing but you can think of it as starting of the Java file. Okay, the .class file. So in general, driver is an interface provided by Sun, whose implementation is classes are provided by database vendor. So yesterday we have discussed, right? Sun Microsystems has defined a interface wherein it says it sets the rules to the third-party vendors so that the implementation classes should have some basic functionality like starting the application, starting the database, closing the database, creating a statement, creating the connection pool object, all such stuff. So it has set a rule, and it has created an interface also. So every database third-party vendor should implement that interface in order to have implementation for it. So what they does is they so now the third-party vendor in our case is Oracle. Okay, so now what Oracle has to do? Oracle has to create a class which is implementing that interface, and then implement all the methods that are there in the interface. So after this is done, they make a jar file and give it to the users. So users are nothing but the developers as of now. So we'll download the jar file, place it in our build path, and then load and register the driver. So that is the step involved in loading and registering the driver. So if you want to load the JDBC driver, we should make the driver available to the JVM. And how you can make it available? You can put it in the class path. You can put it in the, I mean, if you are coming from a command prompt, programming most of the time, you can set it in the class path, or you can put it in the classes folder. And the third option is, if you're using Eclipse, you can directly put it in the build path, so that your application will work fine without any errors. Say for example, if the third-party API library, the class file or the jar file is not available, it will not be able to communicate with the database, because that is the heart, that is the intermediate class which will be able to communicate with the database and communicate to the Java application also. So it is like a to and fro. If you can't identify the driver class, it will not be able to do the communication. So your communication will fail, which is our third step. So to keep the flow smooth, we have to make sure that you make available the .class file in either of the three ways. So once you make it available, you have to pick up the .class file and store it into the memory, where memory in this sense, not the other memory like 2GB or 3GB memory cards. You have to load it into a JVM memory, so that it will be able to identify whenever you're calling that class. So, and how can you do it? The only way you can do or register the class is using for name method, which is available in class. Class is a superclass, right, for every object. I mean, class is a class in Java. So it has a method called for name, which is a static method which will take the driver class. Driver class is nothing but the implementation class of the interface, which is defined by the Sun Microsystems. So in our case, it could be, I mean, in this example, I'm showing it in JDBC ODBC driver. So if you go and look at the example, I'm registering the driver here. So it is an Oracle driver, class dot for name of Oracle driver. So this is the first step involved in connecting to the database. Unless you load the driver, it will not be able to successfully connect to the server. Like, the connection will not be made. So that is the first step detailedly to discuss about. And the second one is okay, loading is done, and now what happens to the registering? So registering is nothing but, now when the JVM encounters the above instruction, it will pick up the .class file from the memory and it will load it into the JVM. So that means the byte class, the .class which is having the byte code, will be loading into the memory, like JVM memory. After that, you have to register the driver. So what is is involved in registering the driver? There is a method called register driver in driver manager. Driver manager is again a predefined method coming from Java SQL package, wherein you can call the register driver method and you can give the .class file or the class file which you want to register. But along with if you're using Typhoid driver and Oracle driver, class.forName will actually do the loading of the bytecode into the memory and it will register it to the JVM. So both things are done in the same steps if you're using Typhoid driver and Oracle. Okay, so that is the next step, and then we go to step 2. And one more important thing that I wanted to highlight here is there are some predefined interfaces and classes available in java.sql package, which we will be frequently using in JDBC API. So I have listed some of them, which are not, I'll just read them out. Driver is it is actual driver. Driver manager is something which you is used to register the driver and do some operations on the driver, and you have connection object, which is and connection interface, which is used to connect to the database, a statement interface, a prepared statement interface, and a result set interface. So we'll be mostly dealing with the last four uh, interfaces most of the time, okay, because we always we statement, and once those statements are defined, you can do the query operation, and then the query can give you a result set. So the result set is an again interface which is predefined in Java SQL package. So if you download Java 7, then you can get them directly, and Java 6 also. That is the one point that I want to highlight. So the second step, what is the second step? You need to establish the connection between the Java application and the database. And how can you do that? So now, as I've mentioned, you have to give the URL pattern and the username and password. So that is the same thing. Now if you see, you are creating a connection object in the second step with the help of URL, username and password, and the URL can be the perfect or syntactically correct URL, which will be used to connect to the databases depending on the port number or the service name where it is running, and of course the username and password. Okay, so and you can get the connection object with the help of driver manager again. So the driver manager plays an important role in registering the driver if you're using type 3 drivers, and the second point is it will help you to connect to the database to get a connection object. So once you give URL pattern, the correct URL and the username and password, what happens is it will give you a connection object. The connection object will have all the interfaces and useful classes, useful methods to create the statement, to create the prepared statement, and then execute the statement. So all these things will come from the connection object. Connection object is nothing but an object which is an instance of the database which you just connected. It will have the session, it will have all the other things which will help us in connecting to the DB. Okay, so for now think of the connection object as an object which will be helpful to run the queries and then get the results in. And the next one is step 3, prepare either statement or prepared statement. So now here also we'll just discuss what is the basic difference between, how you can create it, or what is the basic difference between statement and statement. So whenever you get the connection object, what you have to do is you have to write. Now the connection object is available. The next step would be writing SQL queries. How can you write SQL queries? You can write SQL queries and using statement or prepared statement. And statement or prepared statement objects are two objects which will help you write the queries and execute the queries, and it will help you get the result set also. So that is why statement and create statement plays an important role, and we have different types of statements again. We'll see that when we look at the examples, and you'll understand better. And but all you have to remember is, if you want to execute a single line of code for one time, then you go for statement. But if ever you want to whenever you want to execute a single line, or say a query, the same query for multiple number of times, then it's better to go for prepared statement, because every time you submit a query, what is actually happening in the background is, you remember the query parsing techniques that we have seen yesterday. So since there are 4 things: query tokenization, query parsing, query execution, query optimization, all these 4 steps will be repeated each time you submit a SQL query to the database. So which is going to take a considerable amount of time if the DB is bigger and the query is bigger, and if there are multiple requests for the same query or for the same DB. Okay, so depending on that, of taking into consideration to improve the performance, what you can do is, you don't need to, once the query has been gone through all the 4 steps like query tokenization, parsing, execution and optimization, you don't need to do the parsing, because already the query is parsed. If you want to execute it for the second time, already the tokenization is done, because the syntactically it's perfectly fine because it worked for the first time, and then only the execution part will be pending. So whenever you want to execute the same SQL query for multiple number of times, you go for prepared statement, wherein the tokenization and parsing will be done only once, and it will skip if you work on work with prepared statement. Okay, so that is the main advantage of using prepared statement. And what is the method that you can use to create the statement? Using connection object and create statement method, you can create a statement. Okay, now you have the connection object, you have the statement object wherein you can write the queries and execute them. Then we'll see at the fourth step to how to execute the query. So executing the query requires two methods again. They are nothing but execute query and execute update. The difference between execute query and execute update are whenever the JVM encounter execute query, then whatever, actually they both take an SQL parameter. It is a string, so they'll take an SQL parameter. So whenever it comes across, the JVM comes across execute query, it will pick up the query, it will translate that query into database understandable language, and then all the parsing is done, and then it is executed. Okay, so an execute query will give you a result set object which will have all the results depending on the query that you execute. Okay, so if you look at the execute query, so if you look at the method signature of execute query, it is public, and it is returning result type. So whenever you call execute query for a string, for SQL string, it will give you a result set object. So the example of that signature, how to call is, after you create a statement, you call execute query on that and send the query whatever you want to execute. So this will give you a result set object. That is with the execute query. And execute update is basically used to do an update operation on the DB. Basically, it is used to create, update, alter, and delete. These are called CRUD operations, right? So create, read, update, and delete. So these operations, in order to achieve these operations, you have to use execute update and the query. So execute update will give you the integer value, like how many DB rows it has been affected or changed. So if you look at the signature of the execute update, it is returning you an int variable. Okay, so this is the fourth step involved in it: create statement or prepare statement. And the fifth step is you have to, after you get the result set, there's nothing that you can functionally do with the help of the connection, so you can close the connection. That is the fifth step. So I'll tell you what I've done. I've installed Oracle, and the default username and password, or username and the username and whatever password you give during installation, and I have included the JDBC oracle.jar file in my class path, so that it is like loading and registration part, it will be successful without any problem. And then a couple of steps. So the first step is, if you see, load and register the driver. Okay, first thing is you have to download the jar file. Okay, I've successfully downloaded it and set it in the, since I'm using Eclipse, I've set it in the class path, and this is step 1. Okay, and see here I'm using class.forName to load the driver and register at the same time. This oracle.jdbc.driver.oracle driver is present in the jar file that I've downloaded, and it will help me connect to the database also. So we just mentioned catch, so that it will not fail in case of any failure. Okay, and if you look here, he's creating a sample connection object of interface, and using driver manager.get connection method, by sending the URL pattern and the username and password to the local DB, he's able to connect. I mean, we will be able to connect to the DB with the connection, the help of connection object. So this will, the driver manager or get connection will always return you a connection object, and then inside the connection object you can do the creation of the statements of prepared statement, and then once a statement is created, you can call either execute update or execute query depending on your requirement. So this is how the JDBC step 2 is done, and the connection object is done, and the third step is creating a statement object or an prepared statement. In this example, we are creating a statement object. So if you look at the statement object, we are creating an update. I mean, create table in my local DB. So the statement says create table employee, and whatever whatever table name that I want to give, I can give it here. Okay, so since I've already executed this employee example, it will give me a consent error saying employee is already defined. So what I'll do is I'll name this as a student. Name is same.
So here, the varchar after the name with 15, the parenthesis stands for the length of the name attribute, right?
Yes.
Okay.
That is the SQL syntax wherein you need to create. If you want to create a table, this is the syntax that is available. You have to mention the variable name, the column name, and the column type, and the column length. So all these things should be there if you want to create a column. So now the third step, create either statement or prepare statement objects. In this example, we are creating a statement objects using create method on the connection object, and then we are just creating an SQL statement and then calling it in the execute update. Since why are we calling execute update? Why are we not calling execute query? Execute update we have discussed just now. It is used to do the updations, deletions, and insertions on the database table. So since this is a creation, we are using the create update so that it will return some input. So execute update is the fifth step, and fourth step, connection close, is the fifth step. So these are the 5 steps involved in creating or connecting to a database. So let me run this program. Hey, I'll have some water and come. Just give me one more minute. Okay, so these are the steps, guys. I mean, I'll just put it here so that whenever I send you this example, you can follow. Step 1. Step 2. Step 3. Step 4. Step 5. I mean, you can include 4 for creating the query also, but that is not it doesn't play a major role in creating the connection object or executing it. It is just a string. You can name it anything. But the other things are the basic things that you need to do whenever you want to connect to the database. Okay, so I've already run this. So it is just saying Oracle JDBC driver has been registered, because there are no exceptions. If there are any exceptions, it will go inside the catch block, and then it executed the step 2. We got the driver connection object, and then uh, object called student has been created in the system. Okay, so now this is how you can create, or connect to a database, create some query, and then execute it. Let me see this. Okay, so now we will discuss about what is the difference between execute update and execute query. Basically, there are two different methods used to execute the SQL queries that you write. So the first one is the execute update method is actually used to yeah. So the execute update method is basically used to create, update, alter, dropper, and insert, because they are doing some updation on the table, right? So it makes sense to use create, update. It is not only with the name, and the other point is whenever you execute insert, update, delete, the execute update will return you an integer value, how many, like say it's stating how many rows have been updated because of this execute update query. So I mean execute update method by sending your query. So that and execute update method will return an integer value. Now if you come back to the execute query is a method which will return you a result set object. This result set object is nothing but whenever you want to write some select query, and when you want to get some result set object, you tend to use execute query method. Okay, so that is the reason there is a difference between execute query and execute update method. Okay, and there are some small modifications in not modifications, there are some you can say the implementation done by the third party vendors, because execute update I said in Oracle it will give you a row count, but whereas coming to some other you know uh, type of driver that you are using, it may not give you the return value. Okay, it is dependent on uh, the driver that you are using, and you can see what it is returning by going into the details of execute update. If you see, the execute update is returning an integer value. If you look at the method signature, so this is coming from the JDBC or JDBC jar file, right? So that is why you are able to see the execute update method. Okay, so it returns either one or the row count of SQL data modifications depending on the number of rows it has updated using execute update method. Okay, so if you look at execute query, it is also taking a string value. We are not executing it, we are just seeing what execute is method signature is. Okay, so if you see the execute method signature is taking an SQL and is throwing an SQL exception, and it is returning a result set object. So the result set object is used to get the results from that result set object and then render it depending on your requirement. Okay, so this is how it is basically used for only select purposes. This is used for updation purposes. Obviously when you update something, you will not get a result set object, right? If you execute in Oracle or any DB that you are familiar with, so it will give you a written result, an integer variable for execute update, like how many rows have been updated. If it is execute query, then it will give you the result set object depending on the query that you have written. So those are the basic differences, and execute update, keep in mind, will not work exactly as it is working in the current scenario. Okay, so now since there's nothing much to discuss about the integer value which is written by the execute update method, we'll talk about result set object which is coming from execute query, so that whenever whatever we have created, no, when we write some insert query or some other query, we will be able to execute it properly. So as part of JDBC applications again, we when we are using execute query method, we'll get a result set object, and result set object is an interface in Java in Java API. Again, it comes from Java.SQL package. So you can think of the result set object um, as an array of objects which is having results, and the cursor, and there will be a cursor which will be waiting at the first data in that particular array. Okay, and to when you are reading the data, this cursor will move one step down every time you are reading it in the forward direction. Okay, so the cursor plays a very important role. You will understand why the cursor plays important role, but for now think of the result set as an array, and you have a cursor where it is pointing to the starting point of the result set object, and whenever you are reading the result set in forward direction, the cursor moves to the next record depending on the availability. Okay, and so now I was telling how you can render the result set object, and how can you do that. Okay, so the next one that you can look at is the next method, which is coming from the result set object itself, which will give you the element that is coming in the next line. Okay, it is I told you, right, think of it as a array where each element will be identified with the help of next. It doesn't have any index as of uh, like any other JavaScript or any other like basic Java. The next will actually call the next element every time you call next on it. Okay, and once you call next, there is another method. Now the data is the cursor is available pointing at the next value. So what should you do? You should get the value with the help of get method. So the get method takes different it has different signatures. One is the x-axis is for example, if you are using an integer variable in the first row. So when I click on uh, next rs.next, what it will do, it will go and pick the number variable like in the number one, but you are returning it as a string. So that is actually a case where you want to get only numbers with the help of xxx methods. XXX is nothing but it could be the return type that you want to get. It could be an integer, it could be a string, it could be a boolean or a float or a double, anything that you want to put here. Okay, so there is this string, there is a get method for each and everything. There is for example, you can give as get first name, which you define as a string, and public whatever return type that you want to put here. So we'll look at some of the examples that are there available. So I mean, I've taken student class because it is easier for you to understand, because employee is already defined. So we'll come to create statement. We'll come from each step. So the main method is being called, and if you look at the every interface driver manager connection SQL and S statement, they're all coming from the Java package, and only the JDBC ODBC driver that is being registered here will be coming from the jar file. Okay, this is step one, as we all know that, and the second step is connecting to the database using the URL name and password, and the next one is we are creating a statement. So this is step 3, and the next one is step 4, and closing the connection would be step 5. Okay, so this is done. Now what we are doing here is we are we are actually inserting records into employee class, since these have been already inserted, you know, and the employee table structure is like this. It will have name of the employee, employee ID, and then department. So that is the same way that I'm using the insert query here. We are using employee values equal to, we'll put okay. So this is a line where we are inserting the query, and we are calling execute update method. So if you look at the execute update method, it is returning me an integer value, like how many records have been updated in the DB. So since it's a single insert query, we will be able to update only one record in the database. So when we can run this example and see how this is being executed. So int I will be printed saying that this many rows are updated, and then we close the connection. Okay, the execution is done. Now if you look at the console, you can see there's one line which is common for every application saying that your driver has been registered, so we'll ignore that. The next one is the rows updated are only one, because we are inserting into an employee table, and then one row will be updated here. That is why we are getting a result as one. Okay, and again the last one is just a statement with if there are no errors. So you can insert or using execute update method and then get it done. So now we have seen create, we have seen insert with execute update method, and the next one we are going to look at is execute create statement, and we will use execute query to get the results whatever we have just saved. So let's go to the other example and maximize that. So again the steps I'll write down the steps so that you will understand, and the reason that I'm repeating it here is so that it will go into your mind, so that you can recollect it whenever it is needed. So step 1 is like loading and registering the driver. Step 2 is getting the connection object by using the URL and password, and step 3 is creating the create statement or the prepare statement. Step 4, execute the query, and step 5, closing the connection object. So these are the steps involved in getting the connection object and closing it, and the connection of JDBC using JDBC API. So once you execute this, it's been inserted, right? Okay. Here is select statement. I'm sorry, I'm looking at the select again. The name is confusing, but what is it actually doing? It is actually inserting employee again. So we'll go to the select query. Step 1 is Oracle connecting to the DB. I'm loading and registering the driver.
Yes, హార్డ్నెస్ కూడా ఏం లేవు కదండి. వస్తే పోతున్న వాళ్ళకి హెల్ప్ అన్నా చేయాలి.
You